Revolution Radio proudly presents, live from the heart of the Blue Ridge, Roanoke, Virginia. It's the Just Bernard Show with host Bernard Alvarez. Join Bernard as he shares topics that reveal the real matrix and empower your human experience, including world liberty, the esoteric, suppressed technologies, spiritual ascension, and human consciousness. Humanity has awakened, and our time has come to realize our full potential. And now, live from the Star City, your host, Bernard Alvarez.
Hello, and welcome everybody to another episode of the Just Bernard Show here on Revolution Radio. My name is Bernard Alvarez, and I will be your host over the next couple hours. We've got another fascinating guest joining us this week who is going to be speaking with us about one of our favorite topics, suppressed technologies that aren't really out in the mainstream. We're going to be talking about energy medicine, as well as other technologies with our guest Gary Wade in just a few minutes. First of all, let me welcome our assistant producer director of the GIC, Trevor Knott, is joining us from Canada. Good morning, Trevor. How are you today?
Hello.
And how is life in Canada this week? I haven't seen much in the news. Is there any big topics happening?
Not really. The biggest topic in the news up here right now is flooding, because it's spring and they want people to be scared of the water. And last night at about 12:30, I decided to go outside and take up my garbage, which is, I'd never take up my garbage to that late. And just by chance, I witnessed a spectacular UFO light show in the sky.
Wow, fantastic. Well, that's great. We're going to be talking about UFOs today as well. What was it, like the Phoenix Light type thing?
It was in the northwestern sky, like really, really low, and there were this one really bright light that really didn't fit. It was a flickering light, but it was standing very still. It was very low in the sky, and it was like extremely bright. I'm like, that doesn't fit in the sky. And I saw an aircraft approaching it from the west. I'm like, I wonder if this is like an aircraft, a human aircraft.
Right, military.
Try to check it out. And the human aircraft went lower and lower just to get close to it. And right when it got right underneath it, it turns out it was another UFO, because right when it got underneath it, it turned around, went underneath it, and it went right beside it, and its lights got just as bright as the other one, and it took its place, and the other one slowly moved off.
Wow, that's so cool. I'm sure we're going to be seeing a lot more now that it seems our consciousness is waking up to being able to see these phenomena. I wonder if anybody else who was in Winnipeg, Manitoba last night got to see this. By all means, please share it with us on our Facebook page at facebook.com/Global Illumination Council. We'd love to hear from you if you were a witness to this and what you saw as well. For me, let me just tell you a little bit. Last Thursday, we did have some complications technologically speaking. We were supposed to be doing a live broadcast with Roxy Lopez, and thanks to the new Skype, we weren't able to get a video feed from Roxy. So we had to postpone our show, and we will be doing our talk, our 1 hour program, our Tribe TV program, which we do every month, this Thursday instead at 4 p.m. Eastern Time. So our fellow hosts here on Revolution Radio, Roxy Lopez, and myself, will be doing a 1 hour, if not longer, extended discussion on how to get your message across effectively on Facebook. We know how hard it is just to get noticed, much less get your message across and communicate effectively. So we'll be doing that. It's a free broadcast. Roxy Lopez, and myself on the GSE.org this Thursday at 4 p.m. Eastern Time. So we hope that you can make it as well. We'll be posting the archives, as usual, on our YouTube channel. Anyway, without further ado, I would like to tell you a little bit about our guest today. Gary Wade is a physicist by training. He has worked for 7 years in the advanced manufacturing technology section of Hughes Aircraft Company. He was scientific advisor to the National Health Federation and science editor for Health Freedom News. Currently, he is doing research and is the research director of the American Institute of Rehabilitation, helping develop now cutting-edge healing technologies. So let's welcome to the show Gary Wade. Hello, Gary. How are you today?
Very good, Bernard. How are you?
I'm doing very well. Now that I'm on the air, I feel alive.
Okay.
It's a little bit of a dreary day here in Roanoke, Virginia. It's very rainy and misty and whatnot. It kind of makes you tired, But I guess we could talk about how weather affects our health as well. But again, welcome to the show. We're very honored that you were able to join us today for the full 2-hour show. Gary, can you let's start off by having you share a little bit about your story. What got you interested in physics? What have you been doing, and where are you now?
No, as a kid, I just started off knowing that I guess about the time I was 5 or 6, that this was more or less what I wanted to do. I didn't know what they called it, so I just kept describing it to adults, and they said, "Well, it sounds like you want to be a scientist, And as time went on, as I learned more, I learned the word, physics and physicist and all that stuff. And so I just headed down that path because it had the information I really wanted, because what I really wanted to be was a problem solver. I love technical problems, and so I guess that's what all of us have, those things that make our life interesting for us, and mine is give me a good technical problem to work on. So that's how I got involved, I guess you'd say, being a physicist, because it was the only discipline that really had all the skills and stuff I needed for really interesting problem solving. And as time went on, I went through my career, some of which you've mentioned there. And of course, as a very young person, at 4 and a half, I saw my first flying saucer up close and personal. Didn't even know what it was. It was just there flying by me. I was looking out of a second-story window over an alleyway, and this thing came down the alley flying edge on, and it came right in front of me. The whole thing was rotating, except for the dome wasn't. The dome was facing out towards me. It was about maybe 15 feet in diameter, maybe slightly more, and about 15 feet from me, if that. And it was so close I could see that it needed a good washing. It was kind of dingy. And I could see this funny haze around the hull and whatnot that I now interpret as some type of part of the propulsion field around it. Didn't make any noise, and it was only moving about maybe 5 to 10 miles an hour in front of me. Just went on by me, and I thought, I wonder what that is. At 4 and a half, everything's kind of new, and I lived in the country, and this is one of my first times in the city. So I didn't even mention it to my parents. I just went on about life. It wasn't until about 1952 when I was going to the movie theater for during the weekend. My parents would go shopping and come in from the ranch, and they'd drop me off to the theater. In those days, you could drop your 7-year-old off and come back and pick them up without worrying about them being snatched. Anyway, they used to show the RKO video, the newsreels, in the theater. And in 1952, in July, it turns out that the UFO guys decided to make a big splash in the country. So 5 of them flew into Washington, D.C. and parked themselves over the Capitol building all weekend, a couple, 4,000 feet, whatever it worked out to be. And the RKO video people, newsreel guys, they went out and cranked their cameras or whatever they did in those days and did a newsreel on it, interviewed a Navy admiral and an Air Force general about it. It was kind of a funny interview because all they would say is one said they couldn't see it in their radar, and the other one, the Air Force general, says, well, we can see it. Our radar works fine, and we can see them. That's all they would say. They wouldn't commit anything else. So the rest of the newsreel in that part was just to look back up at them and see that they were still there. But anyway, at that point, I realized that, hey, the aliens really are here. And, disclosures actually happen. It's just that we've decided to basically ignore it because nobody was going to deal with it, really.
I'm glad you said that because I personally feel that all this, there's so much talk about governmental disclosure. And for me, it just seems that there are just so many of us so many public citizens that have had our own experiences that for me, it's not really necessary. I guess it would be for the mainstream to try to grasp it, but I feel disclosure has already happened. They have definitely made themselves known to us.
Oh yeah, millions upon millions of us have seen these things more than once and up close. There's no doubt about it. Anybody that really wants to do any proper research, there's enough literature, books, videos, photographs. You have to be kind of a dullard to not know they're here or be psychologically very afraid of it, and there's a lot of people who are still that way. They don't really know how to handle it because of their religion or their belief system, or just because they really feel uncomfortable that people from other star systems can come down here and do what they want anytime they want, and not much we can really do about it. But luckily, these people are not hostile to us in general. If they wanted to give us harm and damage, they would have long since done us in.
I agree. Absolutely. Now, today we're going to be talking a little bit about some suppressed technologies, and some of them might be UFO technologies, and some of them may have been developed alternatively. And one of the disciplines that you work with is Rife technology, and I've been hearing so much about it lately, and I've actually had several people on the show that have been working with it. I can't help but notice that there seems to be a common synchronicity here as far as my focus and my attention on this. Can you tell us a little bit about your work with Rife technology and what is Rife technology?
Okay. It was in the early 90s. I was driving along, minding my own business one night, crossing L.A. on the way to see a friend, as I recall, or a little after midnight, I think it was. And I was listening to our favorite radio program on Roy of Hollywood show on a KPFK. And he was rebroadcasting an old radio program of Bill Jenkins, the Open Mind program, that many of the listeners might be familiar with. And it was the most popular program in its time slot for like 7 years running at the time. And anyway, they had Stephen Laverne Ross of the World Research Foundation on. They were talking about this guy, Royal Raymond Rife, and his Rife microscope and all these astounding things this guy did. And I'm listening to this program going, what? Anyway, they made an offer of an information packet on him to go over technically and whatnot what he'd been doing. So after I'd listened to this program, I got a hold of them. They were located at that time out here at Sherman Oaks, and now I think they're in Sedona, Arizona. But anyway, I got a hold of them. They offered the package. It's still for $20. I sent my $20. I read the packet. I convinced myself after reading it, I said, my God, this is real. This guy really did all these fabulous things. He did invent a microscope that could see down to the virus level optically, which, as I've been taught in physics, you couldn't do. He had found a way to do it. He got around a thing called the Fraunhofer diffraction limit. He came up with a new type of revolutionary optical system that didn't work at all like regular microscopes. And he did other things. He had invented a thing called a frequency instrument, which produced specific frequencies of radio waves and of ultrasound ultimately in the target, and direct ultrasound generation off the instrument. So what he was able to do was watch viruses, bacteria, funguses, rickettsia, protozoa, you name it, anything he could watch under his microscope. He could tune this frequency instrument to some frequency. He'd find a frequency that would destroy this thing quickly and easily, just disintegrate, fall apart.
Wow. And
that was phenomenal. And, of course, I'm saying it all very quickly, but this took him quite a few years to find all these frequencies. By, I think, about 1939, he had found the ultrasound frequencies to destroy all of the different known microorganisms and viruses associated with 52 major diseases at that time, including the common cancers of the 1930s. He had a fix for about 90-95% of the tumors that occurred. He could kill very quickly, easily, with a couple different ultrasound frequencies he had discovered. It was really phenomenal work. And it got all suppressed in the end by the forces of greed and corruption and whatnot, as we well know. We call it the standard allopathic, medical system, as as driven by greed, namely the pharmaceutical type people.
And this is very, very fascinating that he used sound to be able to destroy
mechanical vibration, just literally mechanical vibration, ultrasound though mainly, beyond human hearing. He had an old-time X-ray tube he had used basically, and a radio frequency oscillator. He'd take this old-time X-ray tube, which was essentially about a 6-inch diameter quartz bulb, and it had a couple electrode elements inside, and they'd backfill it with a little bit of helium gas, and then they would run a radio frequency voltage across the tube, and the tube would light up. And when it did that, each time the polarity in the tube would flip or change back and forth as electrical oscillations, the radio frequency were going on, the plasma would explosively rearrange itself. You couldn't see it with the eye because it all happened so fast. It just looked like a glowing tube to you. But what's really happening inside is exceedingly violent. And that would cause a shock wave through the gas. It would go out and slap the tube wall. That would slap the air in return. And so the tube itself was a direct ultrasound transmitter, like a speaker, except for very high frequencies. You could go up to hundreds of thousands of cycles, even a million of cycles or two of ultrasound in the air directly off the tube. At the same time, the plasma acted as a radio antenna transmitter, so radio waves of the same frequency were heading out of the tube, and when they would pass through, let's say, the patient or the samples on the microscope, the radio waves themselves would bounce or move or vibrate, shall we say, the charged constituencies of whatever we're talking about. And that also you'd get sound generated directly that way too. And you'd also have the light itself, intensity going up and down with the current going through the tube. But again, it was so fast, it just looked like a continuous, to your eye, just looked like continuous. But if you had the proper equipment, you could see that the light intensity was really rapidly increasing and decreasing, and light carries momentum with it. So that also would hit the target and vibrate it too. So you had these three sources of ultrasound generation, and they all had the same frequency determined by the radio wave frequency you were using. So by very slowly changing the frequency of his radio transmitter, he would therefore very slowly change the frequency of ultrasound being generated, and he'd just keep doing it methodically while watching the sample under the microscope until he found that frequency or frequencies that killed it.
Unbelievable. Wow.
Yeah, it was all verified. Like, for instance, there was a special medical research committee thing set up by Milbanks Johnson, a very prominent doctor and businessman of the time here in the L.A. area, and he was got the University of Southern California to set up this committee, and like who's who important in medicine was on it, and they set up clinical trials to verify Wright's work. And their first clinical trials were carried out in 1934 on 16 terminally ill cancer patients. You had to be told by 3 different oncologists there was nothing that could be done for you, you're dead, and you could be admitted into their clinical trials that they carried out at the Scripps Ranch or house down in the San Diego area. And so they took these 16 patients and they treated them for almost 3 months, about 70 days they have operation. And 14 of the 16 were totally cured by using his ultrasound frequencies for the tumors. 2 others almost were cured, but not quite because they just didn't have enough time, so they kept treating them later on. But officially, only 14 of the 16 were cured. The other 2 got cured a couple of months later. So it was really 16 out of 16 terminally ill cancer patients got rid of their tumors with this method. Also, a lot of them had other problems like rheumatoid arthritis, cataracts, varicose veins, and whatnot. And Wright already found the bacteria and microbes associated with those problems. So as long as they were being treated for cancer, he also treated them for that, and so they got rid of those problems too during that. Well, that was in 1934, so
Wow.
They did it again. They expanded the clinical trials in 1935 up here at Pasadena, and a lot more patients. Similar type of results and whatnot, up in the 90-something percent, we'll call it cure rate for cancer. In those days, you could use the thing and be honest about cures and whatnot. This was before all the laws were passed to muzzle everybody about keeping the truth from the people. In other words, before the medical profession really made the big attempt to, just to own your health rights is what they're doing now. Anyway, they had the same summary results in 1935 clinical trials, again overseen by the Special Medical Research Committee out of USC. Then they repeated it again in 1937 with similar results. It also expanded. And by then they were making the thing called the beam ray equipment and getting it out in the hands of lots of doctors and clinics. And so there was a fair amount of people now involved and understood that this had occurred, and that really the cure for all your viral, bacterial, and god-awful diseases was at hand. But it was also about that time the scum of the earth, Morris Fishbein of the AMA got involved and shut the whole thing down.
Oh, jeez. As is always the way, if they can't profit from it,
destroy it.
Yeah, exactly. We're getting reports that your volume is going up and down. Can you just make sure that you're speaking into the microphone, Gary? Thank you.
I'll try to make a better attempt.
We can't control volume of telephones, but we can ask Gary to speak a little more clearly into the microphone. So thank you for your patience, those that are listening. Now, tell us a little bit of your understanding why the AMA decided. I mean, of course, that they can't profit from it, but is it just something? Was it just too out there from the mainstream? Is that why they started attacking it?
You can surmise several probabilities, and one or more might be true. We have to go back and just look at the history. First, they tried to get a hold of it so they could own and control it themselves, and they failed at that. And so if they couldn't own and control it themselves, then they decided no one else should have it. So you can talk it different ways. What the true motives were, how it would have turned out if they'd gotten a hold of it, I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
Today we live with cancer being about a $400 billion a year industry in the United States alone. And that's sort of like golden goose. I get a laugh every time I go down the freeway and see one of these signs from one of these outfits saying, we live to cure cancer. Well, they're blatant liars. They should be saying, if they were truthful, we make a great living on telling you we live to, that's the truth. Come on, give me a break here, guys. Rife had found the cure in the 1930s. It was verified by USC, University of Southern California Special Medical Committee. It's all exceedingly well documented, and these guys set on the information, did not release it.
And he was using this vibrational technique to get rid of the cancer?
Oh, yeah. Well, he had found a frequency. The main one, I think, was something like 1,604,000 cycles, plus or minus 1,000 cycles. That did most of your soft tissue carcinoma cancers, and a slightly lower frequency of 100, 200,000, whatever, lower, did your sarcomas, your hard tissue, your cancers. That worked like about 95% of them. He found that the people that had been treated heavily with, let's say, X-ray or radium therapy, which was used in those days, quite often they could only beat the cancer back so far, and then it would take them, they'd die from it still because the radiation treatment itself had induced new types of tumors in with the tumor. So they would kill off one tumor but not the others, and they didn't have a frequency for the other type of tumors at that time. For instance, Rife was able to kill the tumors so easily in the 1930s because they're almost all caused by this two forms of this one microbe he called the BX and BY cancer viruses.
Mm-hmm.
These were inside the cancer cells alive, these little microbes. They were swimming around and eating and doing their thing inside the cancer cell. So what he would do is shine in the ultrasound energy frequency would go into the tissue, and it would rupture these guys inside the cancer cell. And so when they ruptured open, they would spill their genetics, their genomes, their proteins, everything into the cytoplasm of the cell, and that would so screw up the cell cytoplasm it would kill the cancer cell. So they were killing it indirectly that way because he had a frequency that destroyed or disintegrated the outer hull of this BX or BY cancer virus, as he called them. I should point out that they're not really viruses by today's definition of viruses. they were an operational definition at the time. If you could get through a certain size, very fine filter, you were called a virus. If you couldn't get through that, you were called a regular bacteria or something else. So these things are actually living organisms, but they're very near the size of viruses. Something analogous today would be called the nanobacteria, which are much smaller than a regular bacteria, and you can't see them with a regular microscope, but they still have a metabolism and live down in that funny transition land between what you normally think of as a bacteria and a virus, something like a rickettsia.
Right.
Yeah.
It's amazing that this technology was around so early in the 20th century. What can you tell us about Dr. Reif and what was his life like? What was he into?
Well, he was a bacteriologist initially. He went off to Johns Hopkins to become a doctor, and then realized that he really did want to become a medical doctor. He really liked microbiology, bacteriology better, and he loved photography. He was an expert. He was a genius in optics. And so he started doing all kinds of work there for, I guess, the University of Heidelberg. Was doing a lot of photographing of microbe stuff. And so Reif, because of his talent in optics, and he did a tremendous amount of work for them, and so much so that they appreciated they gave him an honorary doctorate degree. And that's why he was called Dr. Reif, because they were so impressed with his work. Also, he went and worked for the Zeiss Optics in New York, wherever it's called. The world famous lens and optics.
Oh yeah, I have one of those lenses.
Yeah, and so Reif made a tremendous contribution in that type of work. He really understood optics, and he invented the best optics the world has ever seen. He invented this new type of microscope, this Reif microscope, which is named after him, and it has amazing abilities. His best one was called the universal microscope, and he got up to I think about 60,000 diameter, 60,000 power optically. So literally you could see a virus in the living state on a cell with this microscope. That's how phenomenal it was. Not only that, it was like a crystal clear picture. He discovered that you could use, instead of using regular bright white light to flood the field of view and try to focus in and see things, he would actually just use a small portion of the spectrum. He would slowly move through the entire spectrum and find the natural colors for that particular entity. He found that each type of critter, bacteria, virus, fungus, rickettsia, whatever he's looking at, it had its own natural...
Welcome back to the show, everybody. We are speaking with Gary Wade before we went on the break. We were talking to Gary about Dr. Reif and his discovery of being able to see things at a microscope only using specific color spectrum. I find that very fascinating. Could you continue telling us about how he discovered that certain, I guess color schemes were more appropriate to see at that level?
Each type of organism has its own chemical constituent, shall we say, and sometimes you find that there'll be a lot of something in the cell wall or a lot of something in the interior that literally has a particular color. You don't think of it that way, but that's what it is. Everything seems to have a color. So he would very precisely send just a narrow bandwidth of wavelengths. He would slowly go through the entire visible spectrum and just send only a small portion of that spectrum onto the object until he saw it suddenly light up in its own color. And once he had found its own color, then he could very sharply and precisely focus on the object in its own color. And that was one of the secrets why his microscope was so good and such high clarity, because he could focus very accurately on just one color, as opposed to having color compensated lenses and stuff that the regular microscopes had. Then he also had a optical assembly that suppressed this thing called Fraunhofer diffraction. Normal optics, because of their dimensions and the light wavelengths you're using, can only see down to about 2,000 hydrogen atom diameters before they can't separate two things visually. You just can't tell. Everything blurs out at that level. And that's the level of the virus, actually. It's a little bit bigger than the virus. So you can see a bacteria with the regular microscopes that go up to about 2,500 power. Some of the best I've ever seen about 3,000. But that's it. So you can see a bacteria, but you really can't see that much in the bacteria. You can say, well, it's that shape, it's about this size, it's probably this guy here, but I can't be sure until I put a stain or dye on the slide to make sure it's who I think it is. So it's a pretty primitive way to do things. But with Reich's microscope, you can see that bacteria in all of its glory and all of its guts and its innards. And
wow.
No doubt whatsoever what you were dealing with. Not only that, he could see things that these bacteria were manufacturing and excreting into the environment, which were like virus-sized particles of themselves, a different form of themselves that could go on living on different growth mediums. When the environment became too hostile for the current form of the microbe, it would go into a stasis state, and if the environment allowed, it would produce a form of itself that could live in the new environment.
Wow.
Really amazing stuff. He found many different forms of microbes that you wouldn't normally think existed would come from one microbe.
That's. I mean, again, it's very amazing that this was done so long ago. Gary, we have a question from one of our listeners wanting to know if the Rife machine only destroyed the abnormal cells, or did they also reharmonize the cellular communications so tumors would stop forming?
No, they basically just went after the tumors. The normal cells were left alone. I don't know of any frequencies that he developed to reharmonize or to make a cancer cell go non-cancerous. Not that I think that's impossible. Actually, I think Lakovsky showed that that's potentially possible and maybe did some work that actually showed that in some cases. But generally, the tumor, most cancers, when you look at them, what they look like is somebody went in there and screwed with the early genetic blueprint of the cells. Because when an egg is first fertilized, a female's egg is fertilized by a sperm, it goes through an anaerobic stage and comes down the fallopian tube and then plants itself in the uterus and develops with placenta so it can take in nutrients and oxygen from the mother. But until it gets there and plants itself, it's basically in an anaerobic, very rapid division state. And that's how cancer cells, they just don't use much oxygen. They're pretty much in an anaerobic state and doing high division. So it's like somebody got back into the cell's genetics and opened up some genetics that were operational when the cells were first conceived as a new individual.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not that you can't shut it down if you knew what you were doing, but I don't know if anyone knows what they're doing to be able to shut it down that way yet.
Right. And we seem to be coming up with and discovering so many new technologies. I can't help but wonder if the Rife technologies or his work is ever brought into the modern medical field. Do they study Rife? Do they know who he is?
Oh, that's a funny. I was talking with Stanley Truman, who I want to mention a couple of sites that your listeners should check out because it's got real information. One is rifevideos.com. That's Rife, R-I-F-E, videos.com. Wonderful site. They've really done a great service for humanity. They got tremendous real information database plus great historical stuff. It'll show you the reality of the tremendous suppression, what happened and how it got all undone by the forces of darkness and evil and ignorance, the greed bastards. The other site is Stanley Truman's site, which is called rife.org, R-I-F-E.org. Both great sites, great information, and you can find so much information there that you'll be overwhelmed for a long time, and then you can jump out from there to any place else you want to go, of course. But I was talking to Stanley at one of the Rife conferences many years ago, asking him how his site was doing and what the traffic was like and this and that. He made the most interesting comment. His son is in IT information, works on some big company that does, computer service work, and I don't understand that stuff, but the guy knows computers, in other words. And so Stanley asked his son if he would check in to find out where most of his people were. He wanted some type of a breakdown of who was coming to the site, and wanted to feel for his, I guess you could say, his customers.
Mm-hmm.
And his son went and did his magic with the server processing, blah blah blah, and came back and said, "Well, tremendous amount of the people going to your site are from the government. He says, what? He says, yeah, your main visitor is the National Institutes of Health.
Wow.
He says, what do you mean? He says, yeah, well, I can't tell you who, but he says, all my traces stop at the servers for the National Institutes of Health. They're watching your site all the time. So I suspect, yeah, they're kind of aware of it. You know what I mean?
Right, right.
Oh, I guess it was a couple of years ago now. I think it was at the University of Arizona, maybe, somewhere out in the southwest here. One of the university guys made a discovery. He found out you could modulate the intensity of a laser beam and shine it on certain viruses, and it would destroy them. Well, basically, it's a form of Rife technology.
Yeah.
In other words, he induced mechanical vibrations by amplitude modulating a laser beam that he was shining on these viruses, just totally obliterated them right now. Well, there was a lot of talk about it for a very brief period of time, then it was all shut down. They didn't talk about it anymore. Why? Because if you had more than half a brain, if you're a physicist, you'd say, oh my God, do you mean that I could take infrared light that penetrates wonderfully into the body and amplitude modulate it at the right frequencies? I can wipe out selectively the viruses I want? Yes, that's exactly what it means. Oh, we don't want to do that.
Talk about a suppressed technology, and you can see why they would want to suppress it. I can't help but make the comparison. It sounds like this work and this technology is the medical version of like Tesla's electrical energy technology.
Oh yeah, right now we currently are using Tesla's system that he invented, before the last century in late 1800s. And actually, he invented its replacement in 1899, but that replacement we've never seen.
Yeah.
It's that sort of thing. Yes.
You can't help but get frustrated. I mean, it really is very frustrating to know that we have these type of advanced technologies that are probably so beneficial to humanity as a whole. But yet, like you said, the greedy bastards want to make sure that they're making their money off of it. And if everybody's healthy, how are they going to make money?
I'll make a point for you. I've done several UFO lectures over the years, and I did this one particular UFO lecture literally at the request of some aliens. Okay, and so when I did the lecture, I had a break in the middle of this lecture, and one of the people at my lecture came up and he identified himself as a retired Air Force officer. He was a Polish gentleman. He had been in the Polish Air Force in World War II, and when Poland fell, he flew his fighter to France, and when France fell, he flew his fighter to England and joined the English to fight the Germans. And he stayed in during the war, became a full colonel. And at the end of the war, they said, hey, why don't you stay in? We need a liaison officer to liaison with the new American Air Force. He said, sure. So they sent him to the United States, and he was assigned as the, attaché or something, to the commanding general at an Air Force base that's now called Edwards Air Force Base, but it was called something else then. And so he was there in 1954. He's telling me this story. He says, well, one day all of a sudden we had to get the troops out. We sealed off the entire base. We went under just like martial law, And he said 4 flying saucers flew in, and they flew in and landed in a hangar on the base. He said 45 minutes later, General Eisenhower flew in from Palm Springs with all kinds of high government mucky-mucks on I guess it was a DC-3. What a contrast, 4 flying saucers in a DC-3. And they taxied into the hangar, and he said that they closed the hangar doors, and they had their meeting. And he being a lowly colonel along with his lowly general, they weren't invited. But they found out through the chain of command scuttlebutt in the next few days that what the meeting was about, it was an ongoing meeting between our people and these aliens, probably the folks from Roswell. And that the main purpose of this meeting was just basically to get us up to speed. It was basically an in-depth briefing on energy technologies of the future. They had brought along a bunch of toys to show to us different ways to make energy cheap and free, and brought us up to speed intellectually on how to do it. That was the purpose of that particular 1954 at Edwards Air Force Base meeting. That's the story that was told to me, and I believe the gentleman, but I wasn't there. This is just a story.
Right.
But in my own experience in life, now I've seen free energy devices that actually work. And as a physicist, I've even looked in to see how this energy could actually be free and where it could come from, and found out where. So I can tell you myself, from my own personal experience, with no doubts whatsoever, yeah, free energy exists. There's quite a few different ways to get it. There's some available right now, but you better not make yourself very public with the government, or you'll have nothing but troubles, or you'll end up like Stanley Meyer, dead.
Mm-hmm.
Here's a guy that figured out that water has a resonance frequency. Actually,
Yeah.
I think it has two of them. And if you actually can shake the water at its mechanical resonance frequency somewhere up around 40-something thousand cycles, and at the same time apply the appropriate voltage, you can get electrolysis at 1/17 of the normal price you have to pay. That means you can take the hydrogen oxygen now and burn it for fuel in the motor, take some of the energy back to keep the process going, and the rest of the energy is yours. And your exhaust is terrible. It's water.
Yeah.
They don't want this. They can't control us unless they control our energy supply.
Yeah, and it's not funny, but it's a coincidence that I recently, because of this, right now there's a big to do with the new movie Sirius with Stephen Greer and alternative energy sources and alien energy sources. And I guess I got pulled into the rabbit hole, and I was doing some research on that water energy. I forgot the gentleman's name. You said it before. I didn't know.
Stanley Meyer, you mean?
Stanley Meyer. I had no idea that he was dead. I thought that he was alive. I didn't realize that what was it? The military came to visit him, and he ended up going out to lunch with one of them and ran out screaming, "They killed me, or they poisoned me," and he's dropped dead.
Yeah, something to that effect is the way I heard it too.
Yeah. So I had no idea. I thought that I remember when the videos were coming out about his technology, maybe 3 or 4 years ago, but no one had mentioned that he was actually dead at that point.
Yeah, it's not talked about. We're living under a corporate horror press these days. We have 5 corporations that are running our news media effectively. 95% of all your print, your video, everything, it goes through these guys. And apparently they have policies, what they talk about, what they don't talk about. And if you do talk about certain things, you'll talk about it from this point of view. You won't work here anymore. So you can't expect to get a lot of real information from our regular standard media on these things, at least not truthful information.
Yeah, it always seems that they, their modus operandi seems to be to ridicule anything dealing with this type, whether it be medical technology or UFO energy technology or UFOs in general. Right now, there is the disclosure meeting right now in Washington where the
National Press Club.
National Press Club, exactly. And that's going on right now. And the only quote-unquote mainstream that I've seen talk about it is Huffington Post, and that's being, that's some blogger, that put it up there.
Yeah, they're getting popular, but you notice how much people are shifting out of the mainstream media into the internet. That's really worrying the authorities because people they've had it with the corporate horror press. They just say, hey, I want some real information here, and I want topics treated honestly. I don't want to be lied to anymore. So, we can't trust our elections anymore. We can't trust all kinds of things from these governments. They're just disgusting.
Absolutely. And you were talking about President Eisenhower. We're going to have his great-granddaughter on the show in a few weeks. Laura Eisenhower will be joining us, but I can't help but notice, after hearing that story that you said, I wonder if his statement, I believe it was his farewell address as president, when he said that we need to fight the military-industrial complex because they're controlling, basically everything. They're going to be the end of the world, of America. I wonder if it was something. I'm speculating here that if it was after this particular meeting that he was like, oh boy, now they have this technology. Now we're messed up because they're not going to share it.
No, I think it's more serious than that. He understood that having been in the military and having dealt in the war very intimately, and then becoming commander in chief. And the Cold War forming and whatnot, he was, I think, fairly well aware that the surviving part of the Third Reich that escaped Germany through the rat line and whatnot and went to South America, and the fascist forces inside of our own society. Fascism, is a mentality. There's the cartoonish Third Reich type mentality of fascism where you got this crazy Hitler guy, he's over the pale, right? And the SS boys. But there's other fascisms that are much more acceptable to lots of people on the planet that's been practiced for quite some time. For instance, Mussolini was asked, I think, in around 1929 by the press, El Duce, what is fascism?
Mm-hmm.
And his reply was, fascism is corporatism.
Mm-hmm.
And if you can understand rigid command structures, the boss is right, then you got fascism. You got it. So that was a very popular idea with many Americans. For instance, the Bush family. Who's the Papa Bush's father? What was his name?
Prescott.
Yeah, Prescott, that's it. Now, Prescott Bush had all of his stuff confiscated and seized and whatnot at the beginning of World War II for dealing with the enemy because he was a very avid supporter of Adolf Hitler. But, so did Ford liked him too, but they didn't confiscate Ford. But
right.
He had a lot of support before the war started because, let's say 38% of Americans were of German descent at the beginning of World War II.
Mm-hmm.
They were either German or part German. So, Eisenhower, German name. You follow my drift here.
Oh, yeah.
So anyway, there was a mentality. We brought over, about 1,000 basically Nazis into the new forming CIA at the end of World War II. Operation Paperclip, all the scientists, and all the other things and people that came with it. We brought in all kinds of literally war criminals. Both directly over and from South America that were under different identities. There's the Bormann group that took tremendous amount of the German wealth and put it in South America and invested in corporations. It's still alive and well today, but you wouldn't recognize it by the common names, but they're there. These guys have linked up. And so we have in America affected today in the intelligence agency, probably what we would call, what's his name, Mars's book, The Fourth Reich.
Mm-hmm.
So, I see it. Just how nasty it is for sure, I don't know, but it's not nice,
No, and they will do their best to cling to some sense of control. And, it's with people like yourself and with this radio station and myself and the work that we're doing at GIC that there's so much more alternative information coming out there, and I'm so grateful because I'm seeing so many people not only willing to share it, but are literally, for lack of a better term, waking up to this whole concept that, we're being lied to. And we've been lied to for God knows how long, but I have hope. I do have hope for humanity that as we continue to come into this not only intellectual but spiritual awakening, that will be like, all right, these people really have no more control over us unless we let them have it.
Well, right now they've got us pretty much in a box. They're controlling our finances for us. There's two main computer systems on the planet that's monitoring all the Western world's finances. So they have a pretty good idea of who's got what money where and what state of the economy and cash flow. And they know enough now about economic theory, how to crunch the numbers, so they can do lots of things in the markets and stuff that you wouldn't think you could do, but they can do. You just can't trust these guys. They play with the numbers all the time. We've had a couple of crashes in the markets, and those things were driven by their activities. The first crash in 2008, everybody saw something was coming that was paying attention. But the actual crash itself, I think, was triggered by, $400 billion taken out of the U.S. money market accounts in 2 hours out from Europe? The European people did not take the 200, 300, 400 billion out in those 2 hours. Those are big economic institutions that lined up all of the computers to take the money out. And why were they doing it? They wanted to trigger something. Why? Because they were probably in the right position to make tremendous profits and have everybody got crunched on, have their assets fall into their hands. But does our press or anybody actually pay attention to find out and give us the real information? No. Why? We're peasants. We don't need to know. They're playing their game on us. They're consolidating. It's controlled collapse as far as I can determine, but this is just a peasant's opinion from being out here in the countryside. I'm saying, this doesn't look right to me. What do you think?
Yeah.
Well, I trust my congressman. Yeah, he's a pack whore. So, right.
And it's after a while it just becomes so very obvious how we are being played, that it really is like you said, it's all a controlled collapse. It's all controlled division. It's controlled, well, for lack of a better term, a controlled suppression of our human consciousness.
Oh yeah. Now when someone calls me to poll me what my views are on the phone, I tell them I won't poll anymore. I don't want to give you the information so you can lie to me better, or information so you know when the count is close enough that you can now use the computer to flow the election you want it to, because it's too close to call is the official word on the press, right? It's within plus or minus 4%. Well, that gives you a green light to pick, if you control the computers, you can pick who's going to win the issue, right? And everybody says, well, it was close, Yeah, it wasn't really, but we told you it was, and then we chose the side we want to win. I mean, that's the situation we've gotten ourselves into now. When the registrars of, Germany, I understand now, have gone back to the paper ballot. They've gotten rid of the computer machines because of the fraud involved in computerized voting. When your registrar or voter turns over their system to proprietary software of a private company to run your computer system, and they say, trust me, boy, you're stupid and you're in trouble.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And there's been so much controversy, especially with the voting machines here in the United States. What is it? Diebold is one of the companies?
Yeah, well, Diebold, of course. They had to fire their leader president a while back. Was that he was bragging before one of the elections how he's going to deliver the election to Bush, and they thought the board of directors thought, he ought to have a little more common sense than to do that publicly.
And if I'm not mistaken, one of the lesser Bushes was involved in that company as well, or in one of the elections. What's that?
I wouldn't be a bit surprised. Hey, we have Mr. Soros. What is he? A main owner of that Spanish company that's now counting the votes for us.
Oh, geez.
What in the hell are we doing with a company from Spain counting our votes here in the U.S.? Oh, it's free enterprise. I see. It's okay now.
Oh yeah, we're what's it called? Moving it offshore now.
Yeah, right. Just moving our elections and our politicians offshore. That's all.
It just astounds me. It really does astound me. We've only got a few more seconds, so I don't really want to ask you a question. But we're going to be taking a commercial break in about 30 seconds. Another fascinating show here today on the Just Bernard Show. I just want to do a quick shout out to our family here on Revolution Radio. Please take a moment and go to the Revolution Radio YouTube channel. That's youtube.com/Free Revolution Radio. Make sure to subscribe and watch the videos as well. You can also find my work at youtube.com/JustBernard. Welcome back, Gary. We're having such a great show today. Thank you so much for sharing so much information and opinion.
Well, you just reminded me of something. A couple of things I'd like to put in.
Yes.
About a few years ago, I did a UFO lecture up in Central California associated with Coast to Coast's George Honori program. They did a conference up there they were supporting, and I was a lecturer there, and I did a UFO lecture, and it's on YouTube if you want to see it. It's in 5 parts, so if you just type my name in, Gary Wade, Gary Wade, GaryWade, and then comma UFO lecture, you'll get to see my 5-part series. And I have real information on UFOs in terms of actual technical information to explain to people how many of the different craft work, not all, because there's a tremendous spectrum of hierarchical evolution in terms of the visitors here. We're being visited all the time by dozens of different, star systems. Mm-hmm. There's several dozen that I think are here more or less all the time, and then we have interlopers that come in because they heard about the place and thought they'd drop by and check it out, Anyway, there's real information there if you're actually interested in some of the more technical aspects and some explanations of some of the UFO phenomena.
Yes, absolutely. Well, we're going to go ahead and post that as well on our website at thegic.org. We'll make sure to post that out today and share it with all of our network as well as on our Facebook page. So by all means, check that out. But what I'm interested in knowing, Gary, is tell us a little bit about how you got, how shall I say, your knowledge about UFOs. Where did it come from?
Well, basically, natural curiosity, like most people, get interested in something, you go off and you read and study it. And then, of course, I had the good fortune, or it was decided for me, to have a lot of encounters with them over the years. And some of them were exceedingly close. And so, and they provided some rather interesting experiences for me. And that just got me more hooked and more involved. I don't know I guess one of my best sightings was one night around just before midnight. I had a thing following me through the mountains, and I couldn't make out what it was for sure. I could just see it was 3 solid red lights as I was coming down this mountain canyon on these switchbacks. And so finally, when the road crossed over the ridge line on this canyon, I just stopped there because the thing was coming down, whatever it was coming down the ridge line of this canyon. And as I'm sitting there looking at the ridgeline going, what in the hell are those 3 cherry red lights? I found out. It was a 50-something foot in diameter flying saucer, sort of like, I don't know if you've ever seen, what was his name, Adamski saucers from the 50s. George Adamski was a physicist, and he did drawings and talked about his encounters with these guys that had these 3 sort of hemispherical red glowing, things on the bottom of these saucers. I saw one. And it was so close I could easily hit it with a rock. It was only doing about 25 miles an hour or so when it flew over me, and it was right on the deck. I got a totally good look at it. It made no noise whatsoever.
Wow.
And I figure the guys that were in that craft probably came from a civilization that may be like 1 billion, 2 billion years advanced on us. It's a B, billion with a B. And it's hard to imagine just how advanced, in a sense. I remember reading one of my books. I used to go around collecting UFO books and stuff, particularly ones that had been written by, what they call them, vanity books. The guy just had to get the word out about his experience, so he writes his own little book.
Yep.
Anyway, I got this one little book, an encounter out in the Mojave Desert in the early 50s by a couple guys and their wife. They went out there to see some saucers if they could, and they had road flares to get this light's attention that was outside of the campground out of ways. They thought it might be one, so they lit a flare up just to make sure they were totally visible. And the thing flew over to their campsite. And the guy was so startled and mesmerized that he's holding the flare in his hand, and the molten stuff, you look at a road flare at an accident, how they molt and kind of make that really kind of weird-looking hot stuff. Well, that came out of the flare and rolled down onto his thumb and gave him a severe third-degree burn on his right thumb. And then he came through for the pain and whatnot, and then the saucer flew off, and he was left there for a couple hours in agonizing pain with this third-degree burn on his, just all the flesh and skin just burned to crap on his hand. And, they took mercy on him. They flew back over a couple hours later and hovered on the edge of the campsite. They're mesmerized again. And they repaired his hand. It became just like, in the Bible, Christ goes and treats the lepers and they became whole again. He became whole again. So you got to have some pretty good medical understanding and anatomy, and not to mention matter transport, and I don't know, you image what you want.
Yeah.
But I'm impressed when something can fly by and, repair your charred, burned hand.
Oh, absolutely. And, it's just, again, it's astounding how so much of this is going on today. And so much of it is being suppressed, not only in mainstream media, but in the, like you said, maybe it's the fear of knowing that something out there is smarter than we are.
Oh, yeah. A lot of people just really can't handle it psychologically. I think most of us can now, thanks to guys like Gene Roddenberry, who was probably an abductee par excellence, who brought us these ideas and concepts and put it in visual format so that a generation or two now has been raised that don't fear it so much. They see it more in a more realistic frame. It's still not really right, but it's something that's palatable, and you don't panic about it anymore. It's just those damn Klingons,
Yeah, right, exactly. And you mentioned something, and I don't know if you talk about this in your lecture that you were sharing earlier about the different what you said, star systems, or I guess we could call them races of ETs or whatnot. I can't help but wonder how many of them are really trying to help us, and how many are maybe aligning with the suppression of it.
I think most of them are on the help mode. But each of us live in our own delusional belief of what reality is. And in my delusional system, ask me 10 years from now, maybe I'll give you a different story. But as it looks to me today, is that most of them are here to help us,
Mm-hmm.
and they're carrying out specific functions that the group as a whole has decided that particular member of the group is best to carry out. Some are carrying out more or less the cattle mutilations. Others are carrying out much of the abductions. Others are carrying out much of the, we'll call it, selective sightings. People don't appreciate, I think, that a lot of the sightings they have they're not an accident at all. Matter of fact, it was just for them.
No, yeah.
They came in and they showed themselves at a certain distance and a certain amount of input, so the person can handle it or not handle it, depending on what they want to do. I can handle it. They let me see them real close. Okay. Other people, they're not up to it yet, but they can fly off at 2 miles, coming by, looking weird. They can handle it. They say that's not from here, maybe, but they're not really sure. It's 2 miles out. If they come by at 100 yards, then they have absolutely no doubts, and then they may or may not be able to handle it, depending where they're at in their mental development.
Oh, I couldn't agree more. And it seems that now I don't know if you know the work of let's say James Gilliland at SETI Ranch, is it? SETI Ranch? I forgot the name of it. SETI. Hello. And then, of course, Dr. Greer and his work with, what do they call the ambassador program, where it's people consciously asking them to appear, and they're appearing.
Yeah. I believe that they're all over the place all the time. They have technology, they being some of them, most of them, but let's just say some of them are particularly on assignments. They're flying in and out of our cities every night. Hypersonic speeds, but no shockwaves. Coming in, stopping on a dime, picking up who they need to pick up, and out of there they go again, and then they bring them back a little while later. In my delusional belief of reality, they're doing a genetic upgrade on the planet. They're selecting mommies and daddies, picking eggs and sperm, and providing children that they think are the best combinations of the genetics of mom and dad. And plus also quite often, I think, adding a few gene sequences here and there just to round them out properly. That's just my belief of what's going on. There's other people that are being trained. They're giving, like in a hypnotic state, they're being given information and skills, as it were, and then replanted, back safely. No harm, no foul. But people finally suddenly have a new interest in whatnot. They get new insights on things, and it's no accident. But it's being planned. It's orchestrated. That's what I think is going on. It's like in these mutilations, if you take a close look at them, and I have. My mother was a witness to one. She saw the saucer in the field and the cattle mutilation and the whole thing. I mean, she was a witness and got the hell out of there. She knew the farmers, the ranch it happened at, and he called in the state animal inspector guy, and he did a full, what they call a necropsy, when you do an autopsy on an animal, and took photographs and all that stuff. And I got to see them. I was up on vacation, so I got a good look at the cattle mutilation photographs and what had happened in the autopsy. And all the blood was missing, critical organs like the uterus were missing, udder was missing, a complete ear, not just the outer ear, but the entire ear mechanism and whatnot, entire eyeball. What they're apparently doing with these is they're actually growing fetuses in the cow uteruses. And they're wiring up the nerve systems from the eye and the ear into the uterus and into the fetus, so that they can force feed information and also run the tissue, and they also need a blood supply to keep everything alive. That's why they take all the blood of the animal and whatnot. And if you're familiar, like I grew up on a ranch, so you understand that in a cow uterus, the calf of a Holstein comes out at 110 pounds, let's say, or 90 pounds or bigger. You can grow a big fetus in these things. You don't have to grow them to just regular term. You can go on from there if you wish to, and you can do it relatively quickly, perhaps, if you got the technology. So my suspicion is they're growing a lot of humans to different levels in these, in these organs. For sure, I don't know this. This is just suspicions on my part.
And I can't help but wonder what would be the purpose of this. Is it like you said, perhaps to elevate or evolve humanity to the next level? And I mean, we hear so much about the starseed philosophy or hypothesis, And
well, I think we have agents here too. I think we're highly infiltrated in all of our societies. We just don't appreciate it or perceive it. At one of my lectures, my first UFO lecture in 1979, I was up skiing at a place called Cracker Ridge, and the sun had gone down behind the local hills, but there's plenty of light still. And I could see this giant blue-white oval come between the gap in the mountains, and I knew what it was immediately. I knew it was a starship, and it was refueling over the Pacific Ocean at real high altitude, way out there. So I just watched the thing trip along, and as I'm doing this, knowing what it is, I suddenly received, I guess you'd call it a telepathic download from them, because they knew I was there, and I was looking at them. And so I started receiving imagery and information, a whole bunch of interesting stuff, which we won't go into. But one of the things they wanted me to do for them and for us was to take all my information that I'd gotten together over the years on UFO phenomena and put it into a lecture quote for the people. Mm-hmm. And that was in the spring, April of 79, I had this experience. And so by the fall of 79, I had lecture completed, and I went up to a town called Idlewild, which is outside of Palm Springs here in California, up in the mountains. Nice little mountain community, about 3,000 people then, maybe it's 4,000 now. And I rented their community center and put an ad in the paper, put some flyers up, and I showed up, and a couple friends helping me. 30-something people showed up to hear me go on and on about UFO phenomena and, how they work. Well, just as I was starting the lecture, a VW bug comes driving up to the place, and this place is kind of weird. It had a fan-shaped steps at the corner of the building, and the doors were right in the corner. Unusual, but it worked. And they literally came up and stopped their VW on the steps. Everybody turned around and went, what uncouth people. Mm-hmm. So a man and a woman and their young son, about a 12-year-old, come out, and they enter the hall. My lady friend, PJ, who's taken admission, takes their admission. They sit down in the center back, and PJ comes in and sits behind them, and I go on with my lecture. I get to a place in my lecture where I'm talking about supersonic flight through the atmosphere without generating a shock wave, which is a really thing you want to do. If you're doing Mach 6, you really don't want a shock wave because everybody doesn't like you, and not to mention it's a tremendous waste of energy. So I was explaining how if you had a certain technology level and certain techniques, how you could do such a thing. So I was doing my song and dance with my pressure and gradient graphs and all that stuff. Everybody's going, what the hell is he talking about? Anyway, this young boy that came in with the couple, he raises his hand and says, I didn't understand that. Could you go over that again? So I said, sure. And so I went back to my song and dance a little bit. And I could still see he wasn't getting it, but you got to keep moving because, can't go over and over. And so as I move on to the next section, my friend PJ, who's sitting between him and his mother, she's right in the next row behind. She hears him turn to his mother and say, that's not how we do it on our ship, is it?
Oh, wow.
And his mother says, shh, we're listening to the lecture, son. Now it gets better, okay? A year or so later, I decide to do the lecture again at the same town, same hall. I go up there to rent the hall, and while I'm in the process, I'll cut to the chase. I run into one of the guests at the first lecture, a guy named Chuck and his wife Diane, but Chuck's just there, and local cattle rancher. And he says, we start talking. He says, there's something I wanted to tell you last time, but he says, I didn't know how you would handle it, so I didn't tell you. But he says, I thought it over, and I think you can handle it. So he says, I want you to know what happened during the break in that lecture. I said, okay. He said, do you remember that couple with the young boy that came in just as you were starting the lecture? I said, oh, yes. He says, they weren't what they appeared. I said, oh, really? Tell me about it. And he says, well, during the break, that woman, she came up and befriended me and just started making small talk with me. And he said, well, she was doing, I started hearing this high-speed hum in my head, and I felt I had all kinds of information being dumped into my mind. It was weird. And he said, then she started to drop her image. What do you mean? Well, I could start to see their antenna feelers on her head. I could see her head, and she kept dropping it down to got just about to her mouth, and then she stopped dropping the image. And she had these giant insect faceted eyes and whatnot. And then she brought the image back up again. She looked like a regular person again. And so we were out there in the dirt, and I got a stick out in the pine dirt and flattened it out, and I hit the stick, and I said, draw. and he drew a picture of her. And as soon as I saw the picture, I says, I know that picture. It was one of those books I had been getting, it was vanity books. And a guy had written a book about his experiences with the people from the ice planet Hoth. And they're like 2.5 billion years advanced on us, and they're do-gooders. They fly around the galaxy helping up-and-coming civilizations make it through the world government transition state they're ready to go into space. And he said, well, anyway, that gets another long story. But I thought that was a real kick in the head. Now, the other people that saw those people, we all had the similar comment. Those are the cleanest, crispest people we had ever seen. They were blemish-free. All their clothes were just so neat. These people, I mean, I have never seen such neat people in my life. And the reason is they were a projected image of clean and neat.
Yeah. Almost, is it fair to say it's holographic, or is
I
it
have no idea, but I am duly impressed.
Yeah.
you know?
We hear so much about, shapeshifters and whatnot. It's the work that I do, So you can't help but wonder, are they using holographics, or are they using...
I'll tell you another UFO exciting little adventure of mine. I was going up to the mountains one day to talk to some people who'd had a sighting the week before. And it was in August of '67. It was actually this trip this weekend that got me involved in actually trying to figure out the physics of flying saucers because of what happened in that trip. I was coming down this mountain grade into a little upper mountain valley, and as I hit the flat into the valley, I noticed something to my right out in the distance. And what I saw were two ellipsoidal, football-shaped aluminum objects looking like, shiny metal ellipsoids. And they were the same size, and they were orbiting each other's center of mass above this giant oak tree on this edge of this little upper mountain valley, or extra large meadow. Pick your story. And so as I was going along the road, I took my speed down to about 10 miles an hour, and I'm staring at these things, and I really realized, hey, that's them. Those are not from here. So I'm watching these things getting goose flesh, just looking at them. My mind is recycling the word wow. And I get up to the road to a point where it makes a right angle turn away from them. I'm at the closest approach to them, so I stop my motorcycle there. And I get off, and I'm just looking at these things. They're just now about maybe an eighth of a mile slightly over from me. And I'm thinking to myself, gosh, what an opportunity. Here they are from people from another world. I want to find out what their civilization's like, what they believe. I want about the propulsion systems. I want to know why. I had some questions for these guys.
Mm-hmm.
But they're out there in this, how am I going to get there? And I thought, I know this road. And there's a dirt road over here that comes off of this paved road I'm on, goes across the cattle guard and through this fence over here, makes another right angle turn, goes right by where they're at. I'll just drive over, and then I'll walk out over there and wave and invite them to come down, have a chat, please. So I get on my motorcycle heading to get on the dirt road. To my amazement, I can't find the dirt road. Can't find the cattle guard that I know is in the fence line where the dirt road goes in, and I can't see any of this. It's not there. Just regular grass and a continuous fence. I'm going, where's this blessed road? I know it's here. I'm very familiar with this area, and I know the road goes to Merced Falls. I've been on it. I mean, I know the place. I'm thinking, okay, I'm all excited, and I must be misremembering where the road's at. So I drive a little bit away from them, up over this little rise, rolling hill, and drop down, thinking the road will be there, and it's not. There's a turnout, so I pull out the turnout and have a long conversation with myself about what happened to reality. So I decided to go on, and that's another long story. The other saucer story I told you about the one flying on the deck with the 3 domes on the bottom glowing and all that stuff, that was later that night. Anyway, I'm happy to report on my return trip the next day, the dirt road and the cattle guard and everything's back. And so the world's fine again. Everything's fine. But that taught me they had the ability to just change my reality, and I couldn't tell the difference.
Yeah.
And that was very disturbing,
Yeah, absolutely.
Please don't screw with my reality.
Yeah. Or at least let me know you're going to,
Yeah, can you put a sign out or a little flashing signal up in my vision screen?
Now, you've mentioned a couple times already a bit about their propulsion systems, and I can't help but want to ask you, what did you learn? What are there different propulsion systems for different stars?
All kinds. There's just so many, it's amazing. depending on their technology level and depending on what the craft's for. Some craft are just shuttlecraft coming from motherships. They're short range. They're only good for leaving the planet, going up basically into orbit. They might be able to make it to Mars or something like that, but they're not designed for interstellar flight. So you have certain engines for those crafts and certain sizes and stuff, and then other crafts, of course, are starships, usually quite big, but they don't have to be. The more advanced guys have some relatively small ships that can go from one galaxy to another. If you've ever read the book, Raymond Fowler's book, the Betty Andreessen Affair, I think it's called, the guys in there are probably several billion years advanced, and they got a little ship that's only about 50 feet diameter, more or less. The type of ship I saw, actually, is those guys. See, our galaxy, the Milky Way, is really two galaxies. Most people don't realize it because you can't see the other galaxy because it's so faint, and it's a ring. It's in the shape of a wedding ring. Our galaxy and the Milky Way made a gravitational collision about 300 million years ago, and the other galaxy, which was much older, about 4 billion years older than our galaxy, was consumed and reformed into the geometry of a wedding ring, and the Milky Way sits inside of it.
Yeah.
So the plane of the wedding ring makes an angle of about 37 degrees with a perpendicular to the angle of our galaxy, the plane. And the stars in this ring galaxy are in the white dwarf state mainly, and you just can't see them with regular telescopes and whatnot except in the infrared, and it's still very hard. They weren't really appreciated even being there until the Iris satellite went up, and I guess it was the early 80s or late 70s, whenever that was, where they could see in the infrared clearly. And when they did that and the computers processed the data, they said, oh, my God, what's that? There's a ring galaxy around us. Well, that's these guys. Anyway, so we have a lot of visitors out there from this much more ancient galaxy that come down in here and do whatever they want to do.
And I love the fact that you brought up that there are specific, possibly say, reasons for these ships and their uses and how they utilize them. Some people, most people, I guess the way the mainstream media manipulates us to believe that they're always a flying saucer, or they're always triangular, or this and that. But for me, from what I've been seeing, we also have these like light ships that kind of just transdimensionally appear and disappear.
Well, there's other matter types in the universe. So I'm convinced there's at least two other matter types that coexist with us right now. We don't get to observe them very well very often, but they're here, and I think I can show you some evidence for it. Well, you familiar with, what's his name, Escalante, Emmanuel, the rods?
Yes.
Okay.
The rods,
now that seems to be another matter type that's coexisting with us. We don't find the bodies of these rods lying around anywhere. They're not dead, and it's very hard to see them. I think the slowest he's ever been able to photograph them is at 200 miles an hour. And so you've got a little object that's, let's say, 4 or 6 inches long and traveling at 200 miles an hour. And it's also translucent. It's really hard to get a bead on it. And only if you got real fast lenses on cameras that look in the right spectra do you even get a picture of the sucker.
Yeah.
And but there's more things. I mean, NASA, what was that tether thing in space they had a few years ago when the tether broke? And all of a sudden, all over the place came these donut-looking things that had a wedge cut out of them, all the same, just different sizes, same geometry, just different sizes. They even photographed a group of them. I think 6 of them came together and had a meeting, and then what's flying off into all the different directions. It was obviously some sort of weird life form that lives in space. I mean, that does not fit into our regular paradigm of thinking.
Yeah.
And it was definitely not regular matter type. I mean, it was just like a kick in the head to watch the videos and the films from NASA, which they didn't want out, but there it was.
Yeah.
Now I've met some things I've seen a shapeshifter myself, so I have no doubt that such things exist. Can I explain them? No, but
right.
Who am I going to believe? My lying eyes, or I've also met a thing. You remember Carlos Castaneda's book, A Separate Reality?
Yeah.
Okay, he talks about a thing there called an ally, which has the master of auditory illusion. I've met one of those things, and it's not fun. I don't recommend it to anyone. I know where one lives, and I'm staying away from there. So I've seen these different aspects of reality, and I've talked to other people that have had some really strange stuff happen, and I don't doubt it. there's all kinds of strange life in the universe, but usually we're kind of shielded from it. Usually we're left alone, and life is good. You know, it goes on.
Yeah, go to work, eat fast food, and watch TV.
Exactly. Yeah, I'm with you.
But I want so much more than that, you know.
Yeah, I'm not the droid you're looking for.
Right. Exactly. And you know, I don't like to share too many of my personal experiences with transdimensional or ET, but you know, again, I can relate to what you're saying. I've had several encounters, probably with at least 2 or 3 different types of beings. So you can't really say one is more popular here or one isn't. There are just so many variations, and like you said, star systems and races and whatnot. It's hard to, you know, you again, it's so hard. I could go on for hours and hours about this, but we're going to be going on a break in just a few seconds here. And when we return, I want to talk a little bit about some of the research that you're presently. Welcome back to the Just Bernard Show here on Revolution Radio. And as usual, this time is flying by so quickly. I could go on for another couple hours with our guest today, Gary Way. Thank you for joining us today, Gary.
My pleasure.
And you know, we've been covering so many topics, and I just wanted to kind of get more involved.
Some of my work.
Talk about the work that you're doing right now. I noticed reading about, I don't know if you're doing this now, if this is past work, about spinal cord regeneration. I think that's very fascinating. But can you tell us a little bit about that and some of what you're working on right now?
Yes. I had a very good friend, Bill Holman, who was quadriplegic from a car crash, and he was in very dire need of getting fixed, like all quadriplegics and paraplegics are. And so, since I knew him, I started looking into some of this stuff, and I read the book, The Body Electric, by Dr. Robert O. Becker, and saw that Becker had basically figured out how to repair most everything, even though Becker hadn't figured out some of the stuff that I figured out from looking at his work. I'll make it short. There's a website, if you're listening out there, go to vibrationmed.com. That's vibrationmed.com, and you can find my spinal cord repair proposal plus the supporting documents. Cutting to the chase, as they say, essentially it's this. What Becker discovered is that you can regrow basically anything. Mammals don't regrow their hands and fingers, arms, and legs when they get cut off, like a salamander can, for only one simple reason. Our nervous systems do not have the ability to produce enough negative current of injury behind the wound site. For instance, if I cut you off in the forearm, I'm unable to produce enough negative current of injury in the form of hydroxyl ions directly behind the wound, the amputation site, to initiate the process of a blastema formation, which is a specialized clump of cells that form, and then the arm literally grows right back out to the fingertips. That's what a salamander can do.
Yeah.
Well, he did experiments showing you could do that with a rat and do things like that with a rabbit on different parts and stuff. It did all kinds of work. And I analyzed it and discovered what the key missing link was, and that was it. It was the hydroxyl ions, the current of injury. And so once you understand that, then it simply comes a matter, whenever you get something amputated, if you want to grow it back, you have to generate hydroxyl ions at an adequate generation rate right behind the surgery site, and everything else is automatic. It just takes care of itself. The body knows what to do, except it's missing that one, I guess you'd call it a code.
Mm-hmm.
So I put together this proposal showing how you could use essentially something akin to acupuncture needles, but they're not. They're just needles. And you stab them in. You go into somebody that's got a damaged spinal cord. It's all rotted and cracked up because it got crunched in the car crash. You got a section screwed. Well, the surgeon goes in and cleans up all the scar tissue damage, just gets it out of the way, comes in at the top of the cord above that place, stabs a couple of needles in there and puts the right negative current on it, platinum needles, and he goes down below the bottom of the cord and does the same thing. And then implants with you a little device that provides all the currents good for many months. You won't need it that long, but it's right there available. And you seal the person back up, and it grows back together. And you can facilitate the growing back together by using specific lasers also in certain energy ranges, which really greatly facilitate the healing and regrowth and connection. Anyway, the proposal's there, and I say that the reason we haven't seen this stuff here anyplace else is because spinal cord surgeons are in stagnation. The neurosurgeons have really fallen down on the job. I'll point out, for instance, it's been known now for many years that if you can get to somebody that's had spinal cord injury, when you get to them within the first day, a few hours and whatnot, and put DMSO in them, which is totally safe, most half of them that would normally become paralyzed will not become paralyzed and will heal up completely. That's just because most of the damage is actually done by the inflammation and swelling from the damage as opposed to the damage itself. So this has been suppressed in the FDA, that give them the worst name you can think of. That FDA will not let these guys use it. And these guys don't have enough balls to tell the FDA to take one giant you-know-what and stick it where the shun don't sign. These guys are wusses. These neurosurgeons won't get off their ass to organize themselves and tell the FDA, you guys really aren't experts in neurosurgery or anything else. You need to keep your nose out of this. Let us organize and put together the groups to decide what surgeries need to be done experimentally. You're quite welcome to watch, but please get out of the way, you politicos. That's the trouble.
Yeah.
The FDA works for the pharmaceutical companies and other big economic vested interests. The people's needs are, shall we say, a little bit further down on their list, and that's the real trouble. So I put this spinal cord proposal out, hoping that some of these spinal cord surgeons, if not in the United States, someplace else where they don't have an FDA, like India or China or Portugal, pick a place where you don't have some unbelievable corrupt bureaucracy that says you can't do everything. Get these guys out of the way, because it's like the first heart that was transplanted, Bernard in South Africa, right? That's what I thought it would happen, right? Didn't you? No, Bernard was the guy that saw the vision, but no place else would let him do it. Bernard put together a team and transplanted the first heart, and 2 or 3 years later, they're doing it all over the planet. Well, we need that first place on Earth where somebody reads my proposal or somebody else's proposal, because there's other methods I think that will work also fine with stem cells. But the point is, let's get off our duff here and let's get these people fixed. This is absolutely ridiculous.
Yeah.
It's worse than ridiculous. It's criminal. It's shameful. I mean, if there's a God in heaven, some of these guys are going to have to. They're going to have some. What do they call that? Karma.
Yes. And I can't help but just again point out the fact of so many of these technologies are being suppressed just for political reasons and
money.
Yep.
Yeah, and now I want to mention my website.
Yes,
if
please.
I can, because that has a lot of good information on it. That's RIFE, R-I-F-E, energymedicine.com. That's RIFE, energymedicine.com. And that vibration energy medicine, the spinal cord proposal is also on that site. I also do work in pulse magnetics.
Yes.
Where we discovered that when people are injured, you get really racked. Let's say you're skiing, minding your own business, and a tree comes out and attacks you. You know that one? Or you have a car crash, and the next thing you know, you're in the hospital coming to, and you want to know where you're at and why am I black and blue in this cast? That sort of thing. Yeah. These really traumatic injuries, for instance, where you get ruptured, busted up, and you're bruised and just terrible. What happens then is your body tries to heal itself any way it can, of course, and it sends to the damaged site cells called fibroblast cells. And these are like emergency repair kit guys. They come and say, hold the thing together, Louie, and they snatch and grab and whatnot, and they produce this stuff called collagen, this triple-stranded protein stuff. And they patch you as best they can. At the same time, your body is turning on its own adult stem cells as best it can to go in there and form new cells to do the fundamental repair. Anyway, depending on your age, your health, your nutrition, and all the vagaries of life, you heal up to a certain point. Well, we discovered, myself and a couple of associates, that you could take a certain type of ringing, pulsing magnetic field, and you could get these repair cells, these emergency patch cells, these fibroblast cells. You could convince them that they didn't have to do the normal patch that they did. You could get them to do a much more of a repair job. We found that we could convince them to become embryonic-like. In other words, they'd be like an undifferentiated cell, so you couldn't recognize what type of cell it really was.
Okay.
Just sort of a big spherical amorphous sort of, that's a cell, but which one is it? It's not a kidney cell, it's not a, what do you call it, eyeball cell, it's
right.
What is it? And by this pulsing, ringing field, we convert these guys into this embryonic-looking state, and then if we left them alone after that, they would join in with the normal healthy cells on the edge of the damage and become a normal healthy cell. And so with repeated treatments, the fibroblast cells that had gone there to do the emergency patch and form scar tissue, they became the proper tissue would be there if the scar tissue wasn't there. So we could do fundamental repair of a very bad damage really quite easily. It's not totally perfect because there's certain cells that they can't convert to.
And is there like a device you're using to generate this magnetic field?
Yeah, it's laughable. It's just nothing more than a coil. The one I use for horses, I have another website where I sell that product for horses.
Wow.
On people, it's flesh is animal
Yeah.
flesh is animal flesh. It's essentially a 16-turn, 10-inch diameter coil of high voltage wire that runs a ringing 45,000 cycle pulse through it. Every about 2 to 3 times per second, we send a discharge from a very high voltage capacitor into this coil, and it does a regular, what they call LC, L for inductance, C for capacitance, an LC circuit, the standard, simple, sort of thing Tesla used in the 1880s.
Mm-hmm.
And it sits there and rings. My particular machine runs at about 45,000 oscillation, and it induces this oscillating electric field inside of the tissue because there's an oscillating magnetic field from the oscillating current in the coil. And it does more than that. It not only makes the fibroblast cells go embryonic-like and do fundamental repair, it also makes the fibroblast cells that are maintaining scar tissue at depth from adhesions like in an accident, it makes them undo themselves on the periphery of the scar, and the scar slowly melts away with each treatment so you can get rid of adhesions. Gets better.
Wow.
It turns out that if you get the field changing rate strong enough and all that stuff, you induce these eddy currents in your salt water solution between the cells, you're electrically conductive in other words. Well, once the current gets over a certain amount, it's very antiviral, antibacterial, antimicrobial. So you can clean out infections with it. Not only that, it's anti-tumor. It's just, all from one little simple coil. It's a laugh. It's a laugh. But, hey, I'll take it. It works.
Yeah, absolutely. It always seems that in nature, it's the simple things that work the best, it seems.
Yeah, and all great discoveries are made by accident.
Yeah. And how did you come upon this?
A friend of mine was going to go in for reconstructive surgery. He'd had lots of helicopter crash and motorcycle crashes, mine injuries, and he was a smoke jumper in his frivolous youth. He'd parachuted into forest fires. This guy's a hardcore crazy. To put it to you that way.
Right.
So by the time he had reached his 70-something, he had a bunch of shredded ligaments in both of his shoulders, so he could hardly raise his arms up over his head. He actually couldn't even do that anymore. And so it was time to go under the knife, as they say. Mm-hmm. And so he went to the surgeon, set up schedule for the surgery. But then he came down with pneumonia a few days before a scheduled surgery, so they don't operate when you got pneumonia. They want you to heal up before they cut you up. So he had this little magnetic pulsar device from a company called SOTA, S-O-T-A, Instruments out of Canada. Mm-hmm. And he used it for pain control on those shoulders. And since he had all this time in his hand trying to heal up from pneumonia, which he did using my machine, I might add, but in the 5 or 6 days it took for it to get out of the way, he was using this machine 5 or 6 hours a day on his shoulder, on particularly his right shoulder, for pain relief. It would fire a magnetic pulse every 3.5 seconds, if I recall right.
Okay.
And long story short, on the 5th or 6th day, he got up really wanting a cup of coffee out of his bed and went to the kitchen and went to the cabinet and opened the door up and reached up and brought down a coffee can. And as he brought it down and set it down, he realized he couldn't do that because he raised his arm up to a level he couldn't raise it to, and there was no pain.
Wow.
He said, what had happened? Well, the only thing he'd been doing for the last so many days was treating himself with this magnetic pulsar. Well, he tells me this story, and I think about it, and I says, well, the only thing I could think happened is that, those shredded ligaments that are being held together by your scar tissue, I think that scar tissue went away and became healthy tissue. So I called up a friend of mine who owned a facility, the what was it called? The Advanced Center for Complex and something Infectious Diseases. And he had all the stuff I needed, the microscopes, the cell cultures, the stuff, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And so I called him and said, hey, do you mind, John, if I bring over my magnetic pulsar thing and torture some fibroblast cells? And he says, come on over. So we set up some equipment runs and whatnot, and we found that the fibroblast cells would convert over. We were just amazed. So one thing led to another. I ended up eventually building the equipment I'm now selling because we found that not only fibroblast cells, other cells, you could also get them to convert over also. Furthermore, we went into later on into stem cell work. We found we could activate the condensed adult stem cells you find in the blood.
Mm-hmm.
You have tremendous amount of stem cells you would never recognize as a stem cell, little granular things. Actually, Rife discovered them. He called them pinpoint cells. They're just so small and granular, like a little piece of sand in your blood. You wouldn't even recognize it. Anyway, long story short, all this comes from a simple ringing magnetic field. Once you get over a certain intensity of ringing, how to put it right, induced electric field from the ringing magnetic field.
Okay. And then
that's what I wanted to say.
No, and I'm visualizing this in my mind. I just find it I find it very fascinating because it's almost it's future medicine. I mean, I hate to sound sci-fi, but it's future medicine, and actually we are in the future. We are in the future.
Recently, I've been working on another project. For years, people have been using ozone and ozone bagging to treat all kinds of things and getting mixed results to very good to not so good, depending what all the vagaries of the situation.
Uh-huh.
So I looked into it, and I discovered what the secret of ozone was, and it's not the ozone. It's actually a thing called metastable oxygen, which comes from ozone breakdown. That's actually an oxygen molecule that comes out of the breakdown of O3, which is ozone generally.
Okay.
And this oxygen that comes out of the ozone breakdown is not normal oxygen. It's in an excited state called metastable. And there's two of these excited states. One's called sigma, one's called delta. Sigma has a half-life of about 8 seconds before it goes down to the ground state emitting infrared light photon. The delta has a half-life of about 45 minutes in normal air before it goes down to the ground state and emits another wavelength of infrared light. And both of those infrared lights are fairly penetrating into the body.
Mm-hmm.
Well, anyway, long story short, if you can get that light from this transition, the metastable state to the ground state, and send it into the body, your own oxygen, just minding its own business, dissolved inside and throughout your tissues and all your cells and all your nooks and crannies, has a fair probability of reabsorbing that light and going itself back into the metastable state. It's a reversible reaction, in other words. Now, the metastable state oxygen is much more chemically reactive than just regular oxygen. So it has a tendency to find somebody nearby and oxidize it, damage it.
Oh.
Well, you can use that to your advantage because your system, your body, is designed to repair this type of damage. It's got enzyme systems to repair the genetics that are damaged this way and whatnot. But the viruses and the bacteria really don't. They don't have such a robust system. So the judicious use of this, we'll call it metastable oxygen decay light, you can go after these normally intractable diseases and kill them, like herpes 1 and herpes 2, sexually 1. Shingles, herpes zoster, because those particular viruses do not incorporate their genetics into the genetics of the host cell. They stay in the genetic sac, but they don't incorporate them into the host. And that leaves them vulnerable because the host repairs its damage, but it doesn't repair their damage. So if they get accumulated damage from repeated exposures, the virus material is deactivated and the infection is shut down. I wrote an article on this. It's on that website, rifeenergymedicine.com. You might want to tune in and read it and whatnot. And all you people out there that are in the alternative health business, please read it and act accordingly.
and when you say infrared light therapy, how is it applied to the human?
Well, this is just one example of a particular two wavelengths of infrared light that are associated with the transition of the metastable oxygen to the ground state. There's other wavelengths infrared that can be very helpful for people. Around 880 nanometers is a favorite one. That's also very penetrating into the body, and it's very useful for the body because it just so happens your cell membranes have these things called phospholipid heads. There's these molecules. There's two layers of these molecules that make up all your cell membranes of all your cells, and on each surface of the outer surface of the membrane, on the inner surface of your cell membranes, you have this face of phospholipid heads, and in this phospholipid head is a phosphorus atom and an oxygen molecule atom that are making a double bond. And if you shine certain wavelengths of infrared light on these, you excite this double bond of phosphorus and oxygen. And if you excite enough of them of adjacent phospholipid heads, they become an active transport site at the membrane for taking calcium and oxygen into the cell rapidly, which can be a very good thing if you want to make a lot of ATP to repair things. Furthermore, the same wavelength of light, this 880 nanometers, is absorbed by the different various molecules, particularly, though, the enzymes that make ATP, the cytochrome, whatever it is, ABC12, whatever it is. Mm-hmm. They absorb it, and they can use that as free energy to catalyze their reaction rate, you see? Mm-hmm. So by doing that, transporting the oxygen across the membrane and exciting the enzymes that use it, you can really hype your ATP production, and that's the key to doing fundamental repair of the cell and of tissue. And that's why you see all these people with these different infrared LED things that using 880 get all these wonderful results. It's because of this type of reaction. Now, you can greatly improve that by also making sure the person has an adequate supply of negative charged oxygen molecules from a negative ion generator, because that helps in the transport of the oxygen in the system itself, plus the respiratory chain reaction that uses those enzymes that make the ATP. It's an imperfect reaction system, and quite often fumbles one of its electrons in the chain reaction, and it can't do anything until that electron's replaced. But if a negatively charged oxygen molecule is bringing its own spare electron along, it keeps the reaction moving exceedingly efficiently, and you get much higher ATP production. That's why negative ion generators are so good for you.
You know, and I've been hearing so much talk about that. Well, I've been wanting one for years. You know,
buy one.
They're not cheap. But you know, well, someone said to me, they're like, well, if you want a cheap negative ion, just go, you know, certain places like the woods or the sea or something like that will also help.
Well, the pine trees have sharp needles on them, and they're grounded to the earth, which is a 220,000 volts negative. So they're a natural negative ion generator. You go to the forest, you're sitting in the middle of a negative ion generator field.
Yeah. And it's true, because somebody said to me, how do you know it's working? They're like, it's because you can tell just by the way you feel.
Oh, yeah.
Automatically feel uplifted. I believe we had, it was 2 or 3 weeks ago, we had Dr. Will Spencer on, and he works on alternative healing technologies as well. And he had mentioned something of, like after it rains, you know, everything just feels so clean and new, and it's just that's how you can tell when there's negative ions present.
You can smell it quite often too, yeah. It's not that it's associated ozone and whatnot. Quite often comes with a storm. That if you smell that, it's a good sign there's a bunch of negative ions around too.
And you know, actually, I have a very well. This is a personal question from my experience. I used to work. I have left a career working in the fashion business in Miami Beach to do what I do now here in Roanoke. But I remember we had to buy them and put them in the areas we were working in. And it did have a certain smell to it. And what is that smell that it generates?
Well, there's a little bit of ozone generated with these guys. It's kind of tricky. If you get too much voltage on the needles, you get lots of ozone, and then you don't want that. But you want to bring it right up to the edge where you're starting to just produce ozone, and that's when you know you're getting really heavy negative ion production. And it's really quite critical to people's attitudes and physiology. For instance, if people wonder why the full of the moon has effects on them, about a third of the population to a fourth of the population are very sensitive to the phase of the moon. And there's a simple reason for it. For the moon to get full, it means it has to get the Earth between it and the sun.
Yep.
But if it does that, that means the Earth's magnetic field starts reflecting the electron. High-energy electrons coming from the sun can't make it to the moon. They're deflected by the Earth's magnetic field. But the much heavier positive ion, about 1,840 times heavier, the protons, they can make it through, and they're positive, and they hit the moon, and they literally charging the moon up to millions of volts. So for about 2 or 3 days before the fulling of the moon charges up to a high voltage. Well, in turn, that high voltage on the moon induces a dipole field back on the Earth's atmosphere and gives you something of an ion inversion on the Earth. So at night, the negative ions that are normally generated here travel very quickly upwards. And so you have a deficiency at night of the full moon, and your brain compensates by changing neurotransmitters because it's got a problem with energy production.
Wow. Gary, I hate to cut you off, but the show's over. We've gotten to the end. I cannot believe how quickly this has gone. I would like to just remind everybody to get more information on Gary Wade. You can do so at his website, rifeenergymedicine.com. That's RIFEENERGY. Right.
There is no denying the world is awakening. We see it in the global uprisings and demonstrations of the people around the planet and the new way of thinking and living that is arising naturally within each one of us and our communities. I have been a major player in this global shift and movement for over 20 years and have helped tens of thousands of people around the world change their lives and find their voice in order to help create the paradigm change we so desperately need. Join me here at Revolution Radio on the Just Bernard Show every Tuesday at noon Eastern Time for 2 hours of powerful interviews and discussion with some of the most influential visionaries of consciousness, alternative media, and suppressed knowledge. We promise to reveal the real matrix and empower your human experience.